Yeah.
The hydroponic, what I should have I looked up is that if you already said the bracha Adama, it's okay, and you don't say shehakol.
Uh-huh.
But if originally, if it's hydroponic and you know for sure 100%, you should say shehakol. So
Uh-huh.
that was my memory was a little bit mistaken there. So just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. So I guess when people were using that gush katif lettuce for Pesach, were they use it? Was it real hydroponics, or maybe it was just a bug-free type of lettuce?
I
Um,
thought that that you when you're making on the karpas, you're saying adama that covers everything, no matter what. And so the question is, once you've said adama, you're going to say you're not going to say shehakol after the fact.
oh, you mean because it falls into your category of if you said a hoadama on shahakol, then don't repeat it. But I don't know if that would apply here because here you said it on the karpas.
But
So your
and then
bracha is not invalid. This would be a step further. In other words, the case that the halacha that you quoted would be if a person had hydroponics in front of them and they said a bracha or adama on it, then then you would say fine. But in a case where you said hadama on karpas, celery or potato or onion, and then you want to have maror later. Um, I don't know if that would fall into the same rule of you already said a bracha. You know what I mean? This is not the official bracha on it. Let's see. The OU has a discussion here. May hydroponically grown lettuce be used for the mitzvah of mar? In the previous halacha yamis, we noted that there is a dispute among poskim whether the bracha on hydroponic vegetables is shackle or bri adama. According to those poskim who maintain that the bracha is hadama, hydroponic lettuce may certainly be used for mar. What about according to those poskim who rule that the bracha is shahakal? May it be used for mar? Yalkut Yosef writes, this is Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, writes in the name of his father. Oh, that's the son. Yalkut Yosef is the son in the name of his father,
David Yosef, I think. Yeah.
Rabbi Yosef. Um, what's the son's name?
It's either Yitzchok or David. I'm not sure which
Okay,
son. He's
fine.
got he's got more than one son, but
Okay. So anyway, so he says that although he ruled that the bracha shahakol, nevertheless he maintained it may be used for maror. Interesting. Rabbi Chanoch Padua, in his Sefer Cheshev Ha'ephod, takes the same position. They explain the bracha of shahakol is recited for hydroponic maror, according to those poskim, because it is inappropriate to recite bar adama on produce that did not grow from the ground. This consideration is relevant only to reciting the proper bracha, but in terms of maror, lettuce is the same entity as lettuce that grew in the ground, and it is worthy of being used to fulfill the mitzvah of maror. Still, Rav Padua recommends not using this since it is something new for which we have no tradition. Some have recommended against using hydroponic lettuce for maror because of the bracha issue. There is a halachic question whether maror requires a bracha or if it is covered by the hamoitzi of the matzah. To avoid this issue, we have the maror in mind when we cite the bracha on karpas. If the karpas is adam and the maror is shahakol, their brachas are not the same. Sefer Piskei Chuvas writes that there is room to be lenient on this matter, since the main opinion is that hamoitzi covers the maror. Aha. So that sort of answers the problem.
ah,
If you
ah,
want to say that, first of all, this might be hadama, and second of all, um, the main opinion is that the bracha on the hamoitzi should cover the maror. So between the two of them, you're covered. So that would be a reason that even if hydroponic is shahakol, it's it's okay. Um, Now it's interesting because this OU does not want to paskin if it's what's the majority opinion of hydroponics. Um,
ah.
so they do have the a previous halacha yomis about the. Let's take a look over here. Um, oh, here's a Lubavitch discussion about this. Um, from Rav Broin of Crown Heights. I have lettuce that I grew using hydroponics, not in the earth, dirt. Can I use it for my seder? I've heard some say since it's bracha shehakol, better not to use it. Do we hold it's bracha shehakol? Can it be used l'chatchila for the seder? So the answer, shehakol. Best not to use for the seder. And he says, okay, that's his answer.
I mean, that it's interesting because which is worse, accidentally eating a bug or making the more of the wrong the the safek on the bracha. I would imagine
Right.
eating a bug is worse, right? So
Right. But there is a concept that that you don't want to do different than our tradition.
right.
And if it was good enough for the previous Paiskim and Yidden and Klal Yisrael, so we're not going to say that it's not good enough for us. If for them it was good enough,
But
the Gemara often.
the people were also meticulous in how they clean the vegetables, and they were very careful. So also, in other words, you're going back to previous, you have to add in the fact that the people who were of that generation, Halavai, we should reach a level, of those generations.
Well, I don't think that they wash their vegetables better than us. I think we have much better methods to, in addition to having much more research as well but our lighting is probably a lot better than theirs. Um, um, Especially if you have a special light for checking bugs. Just our setup is all better. There you would say you'd check for bugs maybe in the sun, and it's not as necessarily as light. The amount of lumens that you have in the LED lights and other lights, it's obviously much better. Anyway, but so it basically seems like a big topic of discussion about this hydroponics, but there's definitely room to be lenient and use it, even if it's bracha shehakol. That's interesting. Yeah, if we just look at the other OU, bracha on hydroponics. I'm just gonna pull up because that was here. This was the machlokes here that he's gonna bring. What bracha is recited on vegetables that are grown hydroponically? So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef writes that the proper bracha to recite is shehakol. He explains that since they do not receive any nourishment from the soil, they are comparable to mushrooms. Bracha shehakol. He compares the halacha of a bracha for hydroponics to the status of shmita. Although it is forbidden to plant in soil in Israel during shmita, Chazon Ish and others rule that one may plant hydroponically because planting in water is not the same as planting in soil. However, Rav Vosner, Rav Sternbach, and many others maintain that the bracha for hydroponically grown vegetables is ha'adama. Listen, these are not small people. Rav Vosner is the major paisik, and even Rav Sternbach is a paisik. So they hold that it's ha'adama. They explain that Chazal established a uniform bracha for the entire species, regardless of how a particular vegetable is grown. For example, since tomatoes ordinarily grow in soil, people refer to tomatoes as pri ha'adama. Since that is how they typically grow, it is therefore appropriate to recite bracha pri ha'adama, irrespective of whether a particular tomato is grown in the ground, in a flower pot, or hydroponically. Ravad Yosef conceded that if one recited ha'adama on hydroponically grown vegetables, the bracha is valid b'diavad. So Rav Ovadia Yosef was not completely sold on the fact that it's shehakol. It seems like he gave in to the fact that if you said ha'adama b'diavad, you're yaitza. So he acknowledged that there are others that disagree.
Rabbi, we know because we learned this. Well, maybe we didn't learn it together, but whenever, unless there's a hole in the bottom of a pot that connects you to the ground, anything that's grown in a pot is not the same as something that's grown from the ground. Therefore, I can understand why Rabbi Yosef says what he says. Okay, and he says b'di'evad, that might be because somebody talked to him after the fact, but his point is very, very well taken based on the Gemaras that have been learned.
So let's just search that again. A bracha, I'll, it's called an otzitz she'ena nokov. And there's numerous discussions in the Gemara about a flower pot that's not that doesn't have a hole in it. Here, there's an argument. So here, the main halacha follows to say ho'adama. In Chaye Yadam, he says not to say bar adama. Al tzemach shegadol batzei nakav. And his source is Yushalmi, that he's not sure where bread was made from wheat that was grown in a flower pot that doesn't have a hole. But the Karen Eira brings the words of the Chaye Yadam, and he argues on him, saying that even growths from a otzitz, from a flower pot, you could say bar adama. And he brings a proof from the Mishnah in Masechta Brachas, and that's the minhag. And he says, look at the Chavad Doas that brings the words of the Achronim. Many of them follow the Chayi Adam. However, on Gidulei Mayim, it's brought Sheyesh Levarach Shehakol. So again, the Chayi Adam. Interesting how he writes this. It says the main halacha is that's Adam. Chayi Adam, he writes not to make bar Adam. And he has a source in Yushalm. Karen Eira argues. And he says you could make bar Adam. And he brings a proof. And that's the minhag. The minhag is to make Hadam. Now on hydroponics, he says, so the minhag is to make a bar Adam or otzshen or nokov, but it is a machlekes, it seems.
Rabbi.
So it's not so simple, Ezra.
I'm basing it based on the Gemaras that we had learned.
So I don't remember specifically which Gemara. He brings a source in the Mishnah on Daf Mem in Brachos, which we could just pull up here. Let's take a look what Mishnah he's referring to. Of course, it's in the 6th parak of Masechta Brachos, and of course we definitely touched on this, but it's Daf Mem with Aleph, I think. Here, let's see.
I think it was something like if it doesn't receive its nourishment from the ground, it's not as if it's grown from the ground.
So, I remember talking about mushrooms, but I don't remember specifically, that mushrooms wouldn't be hadama because they really get their nourishment from the air and they happen to latch onto the ground. But the thing is, I don't remember exactly. Anyway, he tries to bring a proof from a Mishnah here, which I don't see what his proof is either way. He says if you make a bracha on Peiros Ha'ilon, Bar Adama, you fulfilled your Bar Adama on the fruits of a tree, your yaitza. Maybe that's his proof because it's just like fruits of a tree. They're really getting their nourishment from the tree, but ultimately they do grow from the ground. It says Val Peiros Haaretz, on fruit from the ground, Bar Ha'etz, you didn't lo yatza, you're not yaitza. And on all of them, have said Shahakal Yatza. I don't know what his proof is. We'd have to look up in the Karen Eira on we'd have to look up that sefer and see what his proof is from that Mishnah. That would be interesting to check up. But anyway, it's definitely a discussion here, and you can look it up. Also, it's at least this is one website called din.org.il. That is for Israel. It's a Beis Hora, which I've seen a lot of their stuff. But we could take a look at one other website. Here's Rav Ovadia Yosef. Yeah, let's take a look at this. On pears that grow on trees, bar priyates, on yerakos that grow on the ground, bar priyadama. Now, command pitrias gedolah mayim. What about mushrooms? So he goes mushrooms. What about things grow in plant in a eltzit sheinanakov, a pot that doesn't have a hole in it. So we have written that it's not considered like ground itself, that it's prohibited in Shemitah. So regarding Shemitah, it wouldn't be a problem. Nevertheless, the rabbis were geyser not to plant, even this. So in other words, biblically, it's not a problem, but rabbinically, it's a problem. Now, if it did grow that way, what is the law of the bracha? So Be'emes, the Chaye Yadam wrote that if you planted if you have a plant that there's no hole in the in the pot that it's planted in, and you made bread, you don't say hamoitzi, since it's not called eretz, moitzi lechem and aretz. So he says, you see from there that you shouldn't say bar pri adama if there's no adama. It only applies to something that's attached to the ground. And however, Rav Ovadia Yosef questioned this, and he brings from a sefer from Rav Chaim Pintrim Muli. He writes on bread. That if it's placed on if the pot that it's planted in is placed on the ground, you could say moitzi lechem and aretz, and on fruits and vegetables that are grown there, you could say bar pri adama. And the same thing would be a tree that it would be bar pri eitz, but this is only if the plant is right on the ground. Under it is earth. But if it's on the house, on ground, it would sound like you don't say bar pri adama, or rather shahakol. That's what he writes. Interesting. So it would depend. Interesting. The Sikkim is there.
Now I'm completely lost.
We just added one more point.
Just putting a pot without a hole on the ground, he says to say bar pri adama, makes no sense, since there's no connection between the plant and the ground.
But I read somewhere, if it's soil in the pot, soil is soil. So, right? In order to get the soil, they got it from the ground.
Yeah, no, but that doesn't seem to work. You can't make planet Earth somewhere else and then call it Earth. You know what I mean? And it's growing. Yeah, no, it's a good question, Ezra. This sefer is called Pesach Hadvir, and the Rav Ovadia Yosef is basically just bringing from that sefer that it sounds like from the sefer that if it's planted on the ground, it sounds like that allows you to call it from the earth.
You mean if it's put on the ground?
It's put on the ground. Excuse me. Yeah, it's put on the ground. Now, he doesn't say that. He says this clearly. He says, mashma, it sounds like from the words of that sefer that you don't say bar Adama if it wasn't placed on the ground. What the pshat in this, I don't know. It's a good question. Anyway, this is another sefer. The other sefer, the other thing that we saw was that the minhag is to say bari pri ha'adama. Now, if there's any other website on this.
Rabbi, I had some additional information.
Oh,
When
okay.
you're making this bracha, when you eat, you're not talking about when you're planting, just when you're eating.
Okay.
No, I'm asking the question
Yeah.
you're raising
Yeah,
is, if you grew something in a pot like that, do you still make the bracha? Hadama.
right.
When you eat it. Okay.
According to what the rabbi just said, it doesn't matter whether the pot has a hole or not. If
Correct.
it's grown in the pot or in the ground, you'd say
No, if you're growing in the pot that is then on the
This-
ground.
Listen
Again,
to
there's
what
a few opinions, Isaac. This is
Yes,
that's the
yes.
later one. The earlier
yes,
view,
yes.
which was which claimed that the minhag is it doesn't matter. It's always hard.
Right.
That was the earlier view. That's what it wanted. That's what they wanted to say.
Right.
But there's a lot of discussion here. I see there's a number of websites that discuss that have discussion about this all.
Yeah. Now, certainly with hydroponics and everything, it raises all kinds of things.
Right. So that's what we were discussing. So hydroponics is also a machlokes, and it's some big paiskim. You have Rav Vosner wants to claim that it's hadama.
Right.
Even though there are other paiskim that want to claim that it's shahakol and hydroponics. And all right. Anyway, deer shoe. They have a deer shoe thing here. Let's see what deer shoe claims here.
It's incredible. It's incredible how much Torah we are learning.
So here he brings over here. This is a deer shoe, which is one of the later svarim that bring up a lot of the later paiskim. Anyway, so he writes here regarding vegetables that are grown in such a pot that doesn't have any hole. So he brings the Chai Adam that and Kafachayim that it's a suffix shehu b'chlal hasafik of the Yerushalmi regarding brachas hamoitzi, and there's a suffix if you could make a bracha bar pri adama u'meichiach Chai Adam that it's not called a adama only if it's attached, and you can't say bar pri adama. And he brings a proof from the Gemara Chulin and regarding Mr. Shiloh HaKan that you could fulfill it if it's found on the head of a person. It's called al ha'aretz. And adama al roisha is called adama. It brings a pasuk. Alam roisha min al roisha adam lenishtana shmo likares offer. It's not called offer. Your adam atzma is called adama. That's only if it's attached to the ground. It's called adama. But gadol badshe and nakov, it's not ena nikra adama. So he's trying to bring a proof from the wording. That adama al roishai. I'm not exactly sure what his proof is, but anyway, so he brings that achrasa paiskim. So now regarding the final conclusion, so he wants to say, according to the Eglei Tal, even according to the Yerushalmi, which I'm seeing now, it's a suffix in the Yerushalmi. Chitim that grow, you can't say hamoitzi. Nevertheless, bar pri adama, maybe it is called karka, and you could say bar pri adama. Kemavur b'maharal, that the difference between adama and eretz, adama is called even after it's taken from the ground. Like offer, that's shmoi nishar gam b'tolish. It's called offer. It could also be called adama, but eretz is only when it's attached to the ground, and therefore, if it grows in a flower pot that doesn't have a hole, it's separated from aretz. You can't say hamoitzi lechem in aretz, but you can call it bar pri hadama. So that's the meaning of the previous thing that I sort of skipped over there. There's a difference between Eretz and Adama. Adama is al Roisha. Even if it's on top of the person's head, it could be called Adama al Roisha. He brings a pasuk in Shmuel Beis. It's not called. You can't call it
Shakal.
Eretz. You can't call it Eretz. So that, in other words, the Gemara Yusham is talking about saying a bracha hamayisulachem in Eretz, and we're talking about saying a bracha bar Adama. And so he says bar Adama, you can call it. You can't call it hamayisulachem in Eretz. That's an interesting, interesting point he brings from the Eglei Tal from based on a Maharal. Wow. Okay. And then he says the Karen Oira proves from a Mishnah that al davar shein gidulim in Eretz you say shahaku. What does that imply? That atzit shein or nakov, if it's a flower pot that doesn't have a hole, it's called gidulim in Eretz. And you can say bar Adama, even though that if it's bread, you would say mezainis and not hamoitzi. But he says, you see from there that from the Mishnah, so that's his source. The source is that it says on something that doesn't grow from the ground, you would say shahako, which implies that a flower pot is considered gidulai min haaretz. I'm not exactly sure what the proof is. That's interesting. Anyway, he brings from the Pesach Advir, which we saw before, that you have to say Bari Pri Adam. It's called Mechuber, and it's Chayv Ma'asim Midrabanan. And then he brings from Rav Landau Shema Chazanish, Rav Dov Landau, sefer called Maisei Ish, regarding the Chazanish, that Gidule Yerakos Ba'atashen Anakov, to say Bari Pri Adama. We're not worried about the Chayi Adam, who says not to say Adama. And Rav Dov Landau was Masupik. What's the explanation? Is it because Eretz is different than Adama? Or the chiluk is that Berachas Bari Adama is about the type of fruit that normally that grows, it's a sug pri that grows in the ground. In other words, is it because this is the general meaning, or is it because that this is the general way it grows, or is it because there's a difference in Eretz and in Adama? And he says it seems like the first option. And then he brings from the Chut Shani in the name of the Chazanish to make a difference between Eitz and Adama. Make a difference between Eitz Adama and Hamoitzi. That lechem you can't say Hamoitzi lechem and Aretz because it's not Eretz. But yeah, the same thing. And he says the same thing as Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Also wants to say that it's only regarding Hamoitzi such a problem, but Bar Adama you could say on such a thing. Then he says the Minhag Olam. What's the Minhag Olam? Says the Rav Al Yashiv and Rav Vosner and other people, Abba Shol and Rav Ovadia Yosef and Rav Menashe Klein, Moshe Sternbach, Gross. It brings all these poskim, and that it's not like the Chaye Adam, and you should say a bracha bar pri Adama, and that's the Minhag Olam by thousands of Yidden that they eat things that are grown bechamimos. I don't know exactly this Hebrew word bechamimos in a otzit shein nakov. Is it some type of a heating way of growing things? Chamamos?
Does it mean a hothouse, maybe? Like a hothouse?
Yeah.
Like
Hothouse, maybe. Is that like a greenhouse?
Maybe.
Is that the same thing? What's a hothouse?
We need an Israeli Hebrew speaker.
We got it. Yeah.
It's I think it's enclosed so that it doesn't allow for sunlight to come in, and it's heated from within, and that's how it's grown. I
Okay.
think that's what a hothouse is.
Oh,
And I
okay.
think sunlight does come in. I believe
Okay.
the sunlight does
It's
come
not
in.
it's not like you have it's not like a greenhouse, which is glass. I think this is more of either some kind of a plastic type tent that in which things are grown within.
Now, he says that, so the halacha would be Bari Pri Hadama. 1 second, let me mute everyone here. And he says it's not brought it's not brought in halacha that Chaye Yadam about saying shahakol. And he says, and by the way, even the Chaye Yadam agrees that a tree, Peretz ha'etz, you would say Bari Pri ha'etz, even if it grows in such a flower pot, and because it is eitz, and and the same thing maybe would be ispe besamim, and it's and he says the Ktseis HaShulchan seems to paskin that way, and so that's basically it. He says an interesting thing. According to the Chaye Adam, if you said ha'etz, you're yaitzer, and if you say ha'adama on it, you're not yaitzer because it's not ha'adama. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Okay. Anyway, that's gives us a little insight. Anyway, so it seems like it's a machlekes about this hydroponics, and that was a discussion from a few days ago. I did also look up this question that we had yesterday about what happens if you have a bundle on top of your sukkah and it gets untied, but you personally didn't untie it. It happened to fall apart. So you put the schach on properly. The problem is there's a gzeira midrabanan that you have a bundle, but you're supposed to untie it. And if you untied it, it would be kosher stuff. But you didn't untie it. It untied automatically. So what comes out is that the question would be, is this considered a problem that it happened automatically, it became kosher, or is it called you made a kosher sukkah? So biblically, of course, you made a kosher sukkah. It's only a rabbinic problem. But do we say this issue of tasav leiman ha'asui on a rabbinic problem? So so I saw in the new Mishnah Brura, they have a Dirshu explanations, and they bring over there a Chazon Ish that says that what happens if you untie the schach, not in order for shade, you untied it for the wrong purpose. What would happen then? In other words, you put it on your sukkah for the right purpose. Shade, sukkah, mitzvah. You then untied it because maybe, I don't know, you want it to dry out better, something, you have some other reason you're untying it. You want it to yeah, maybe it's so maybe it's wet and you want to dry it. So you untied it. Now, when you untied it, of course, you didn't move anything around. You just untied it. Will you be able now it's not a bundle, so there's no Issa Drabanan on sitting in the sukkah, but is there any problem because you untied it for the wrong reason? And the answer is no problem at all, according to the Chazon Ish. So why is that? Because your untying is just removing the rabbinic problem. And as long as you remove the rabbinic issue, it's fine. So the same thing seemingly would be if it untied on its own. If it untied on its own, you got rid of that rabbinic problem. That's all we need to do is get rid of the rabbinic problem of the fact that there's a gzeira. And you need to get rid of that decree, that gzeira, that decree that it's similar to this other thing that you might make a mistake from. So what comes out, it sounds like that as long as it's untied, it should be okay, even if it untied on its own. And that would answer one of the questions that we discussed yesterday. All right. Anyway, getting back to our Gemara. So the Gemara that we're on is Yud Gimel, page 13, Amud Beis, side B. And we were starting to learn about these laws of Tumah. And I don't know if we reviewed that law about the dome. Let me just mention it then, and then we'll move forward. So the law about the two laws that we learned yesterday was Maramar's law that had to do with a bundle that you tie together in order to know the number of how many pieces are in that are there. So you have a bundle, you know that you have 50 pieces. You know that's how they would count it. When you would take it home, you would always untie it because you didn't need to know the number. You have the bundle. The store wants to know the number. So the store would have it in bundles in order to know the number. But when you take it home, you untie it automatically. So there's no rabbinic decree in that bundle. Even if it had the rope around it, it would be okay. Then the second law that we learned was Reb Abba. And that Reb Abba had to do with this dome that has a tie on the top. And on the bottom, it's tied together. But the way it's tied together is first it's wrapped around all the different willows. It's a dome that has a tie on the top to attach all the willows in one piece. And then on the bottom, then the willows fall to the bottom. And on the bottom, it's woven around. There's some string that weaves around it, and then it ties together. So if you untie the top, the Gemara said that's kosher. What about the bottom? The bottom is still tied together. That should be considered a bundle. So I had two answers. Rav Papa said that you have to untie the bottom. And as long as you untie the bottom, you don't have to unwind it. As long as you untie it, it's no longer a bundle. But Rav Yeshua, that you don't even have to untie the bottom. It could even stay tied because the point is that it's not going, you don't carry it that way. You know, if you try carrying it that way, that bundle will not stay in things will fall out, and therefore it would not fall into the category of being a bundle that's prohibited, and because it's not tied together well enough to carry. The bundle is something that's tied together well enough to carry. What we saw in Shulchan Aruch yesterday was that if it's tied in the middle, that could be a problem because that might be tied well enough to carry. But if it's tied just on the bottom, it's not going to last that way, and it's not practical to carry it that way. That would not be called a bundle, and that would be kosher for schach. And now comes the new Gemara. The new Gemara we were talking about yesterday that we started, it had to do with the fact that when you use lettuce or any of the other items that are kosher for maror, so how do those vegetables work with regard to tumah, to bringing tumah and stopping tumah? Now, what does that mean? Well, when you put those vegetables on top of your sukkah, let's pick the case of tumah. When you're putting those vegetables on top of a corpse or a kazayas of a corpse, a olive size of a corpse, is under one of those vegetables. They have a big leaf of lettuce. So that leaf becomes an oihel, a tent. And when something's under the same tent as a corpse or as part of a corpse, that other item becomes impure as well. Not only is the corpse impure, but the other item that's under the same tent as the corpse also becomes impure. And what about something that's above this tent, this piece of lettuce? So in the normal circumstances, something that is a tent would normally block anything on top of it from becoming impure, because a tent blocks the stuff on top. However, here we're going to find something interesting. Here, what we find is it doesn't block stuff on top. So in other words, if you have a piece of lettuce that's on top of a corpse, and then there's some mug on top of that piece of lettuce, that mug will be impure. And let's say you have another mug under the lettuce, not touching the corpse, it'll also be impure. So you got both. This is somehow contradictory. It's going to be a tent, so it's going to cause other things to be impure. And it's also going to allow things on top of it to be impure. So it's not exactly a tent. It is a tent, but it's not a tent. Why is that? How does that work? So the understanding over here is that these lettuce leaves or other leaves for maror are very flimsy, and at some point they dry out. And when they dry out, they fall apart. And because this is not a strong tent, it's a tent that's going to disintegrate. Because of that, even when it's together and it hasn't disintegrated yet, we are afraid that it might be at a stage where it's going to disintegrate. In other words, at a stage where it's about to fall apart. And even then, you're going to think that it's going to block tumah. And that's not true. In that stage, even biblically, it will not block the tumah, the impurity, from going upward. And therefore, even when it's ripe, when it's fresh, and it is solid now, even then, rabbinically, we're going to say that it does not block the tumah. So again, biblically, there is a stage where it will not block the tumah. When is that stage? That is a stage that it's about to fall apart. It's almost falling into crumbs. At that stage, it's falling into broken little pieces. Now, I'm not so familiar with this being by a lettuce, so it's hard to. I'm not exactly sure what it refers to. I mean, I know it does shrivel up, but falling apart, I don't know. To me, it's not as I'm not so. I can't really picture it with the lettuce falling apart into pieces. Maybe some of you know better than me about that. But anyway, the understanding is that there is a stage where it will fall apart into pieces and fall and
Rabbi?
not be. Now, if it does fall apart into pieces, then there's no tent there. You have to have one handbreadth by a handbreadth. So that's for sure not going to block any tumah, any impurity from shooting upward, because there's no tent. But even before that stage where it's broken apart, but it's very flimsy and almost about to fall apart, but it hasn't fallen apart yet, but it's ready to fall apart. Even that stage, biblically, it's already considered like it's not there, and it does not block tumah. And the rabbis were nervous that when it's at that stage, you might make a mistake and think it does block the tumah. So therefore, the rabbis decreed that even before that stage, when it's fresh, even then, the rabbi said that it will not block the tumah, and the tumah, the impurity, will shoot upward. Yes, Moshe.
Is this the same there's different kinds of lettuce? I mean, romaine lettuce, is it the same as the other kind of lettuce? I mean, that would have that same effect?
So for some reason, people seem to use romaine lettuce for maror. I am told, I remember hearing from a Rav in Providence that claimed that even regular lettuce is kosher for maror. So I don't think I've seen people do that, use iceberg lettuce for maror, but he claimed that it's fine. I don't know. I see Isaac doesn't seem to think so. I've never used iceberg, I don't think, but I think I remember it correctly. Even Ezra doesn't agree with that. Okay. Well,
our custom is to use escarole for the maror, and romaine is for the hazeret.
Romaine, but not iceberg.
No.
Right?
No, escarole. Escarole is the maror.
The point of romaine is that it's sweet when you start.
Right.
But it becomes bitter later. And the point of the whole thing of maror is that it seemed sweet when you started it. When Paro called everybody in, everything was sweet.
Right.
And even mixing now, the idea of intermarriage, and I forget what the connection is that everything is sweet right now, but later it's going to be bitter.
I understand. Okay. Now, if we want to know, here's a, let's see.
I don't think iceberg has a characteristic of becoming bitter later.
Well,
It's called lettuce, but that's about it.
It's similar to onions, which are sweet in the beginning and bitter after. I don't know, bitter but strong.
So I've had regular iceberg, not for Pesach, but just like during the year. If you get near the bottom, like the very inside of the where the stem is from the stalk, there is a bitter taste to it. So, but
even
not the outer green leaves. Regular iceberg, if you go way down into the deep part of it, where it grows, I guess that part I have tasted bitter in there.
Paiskim which accepted lettuce as maror. He brings here. He brings Or Letzion says that a person should use romaine and not iceberg, or celtus, which I don't know what that is, since we have a long-standing Masorah to use romaine and there's no Masorah for the others. But the other Paiskim don't seem to mention that so much. I mean, they bring. I mean, here this is. They bring chasa, and which is I think modern term for lettuce, latich, latuga, salat, shalotin. What's Yiddish? How do you say lettuce in Yiddish? Salatin, maybe. What? Salatin, is that lettuce?
Shallot, I thought shallot is a kind of like an onion type thing.
No, a Yiddish word.
Oh,
Salatin, and latich, and salat, and chasa. All these words seem to include iceberg. I'm just that's what I think. Zarzich in Polish, anyone? Anyway. All right. Anyway, bottom line is that that there is that there must be. Oh, interesting. And of course, they go through the whole question about. Here, Rav Shechter quotes Rav Aaron Kotler, who ate iceberg lettuce, and Rav Soloveitchik, who held it was specifically romaine lettuce. Aha. So here we got it clear machloikus over here. Rav Soloveitchik held it's romaine, since that's what Chazal had in Israel at the time. Explained that horseradish isn't considered mara. Rav Eider quotes this practice of Rav Aaron Kotler, and Rav Gornish quotes some who think that iceberg lettuce is acceptable. Rav Shloimeh Amar also agrees that horseradish isn't maror at all. Rav Shechter explained that one should not eat romaine lettuce together with horseradish, since horseradish isn't a mitzvah. Its taste nullifies the taste of the maror, and one does not fulfill one's obligation. Wow. Now, of course, these are nice. This is more academic, because everyone, of course, follows their minhag. I'm not telling you what to do, because, of course, the Lubavitch minhag is to have romaine and horseradish, but I mentioned to you that there seems to be question about horseradish if it's even if it is maror. Of course, we think it's maror because it tastes like maror, but yeah, they have a whole discussion.
It tastes bitter. It doesn't
taste bitter.
Like maror. It tastes bitter.
He in the Jewish Action, which I think is written by the OU, the magazine of the Orthodox Union. They have a whole discussion. Rabbi Dr. Ari Zivotofsky. He says misconception: horseradish is the preferred item to use for maror. The fact is, among Ashkenazim, horseradish is widely used, while often appears as a translation for tamcha, but the translation is inaccurate, and even though it's considered acceptable at the Seder, according to many poskim, lettuce and endives are preferable. And he goes through the whole thing here, and it actually does make sense because well, I don't know what horseradish looks like, but our Gemara is talking about the yerakos that are acceptable for maror, and it talks about them um, getting smaller and falling apart. I don't know if horseradish does that. Then again, I don't know if lettuce does that really either. But anyway, he brings the whole discussion here of which I was touching upon a different day. I mentioned it. But anyway, the minhag definitely is to use it. And Rav Tzvi Ashkenazi, Shalosh Chuvas Chacham Tzvi, provides a wonderful summary of this topic. He explains horseradish came to be used for maror because lettuce was not available in cold climates, or because those dwelling far from Israel lost the ability to identify the correct species of lettuce. He then laments the conundrum that this situation caused.
I got the equipment. I'm going to be bringing the evidence for.
So he then, so he says it developed. Interesting. Because dwelling far from Israel, they didn't have the correct species. He then laments the conundrum that this situation caused. Those who are not careful about keeping mitzvahs do not fulfill their obligation to eat the required amount of maror because horseradish is too sharp, while those who try to be meticulous about keeping mitzvahs eat the proper amount and thereby endanger their health. He decries the fact that horseradish was even being used in parts of Germany and Amsterdam where leafy vegetables are available during the spring. That lettuce was preferred choice was never forgotten among European Jewry, and thus customs developed wherein both vegetables were used. For example, some people would use lettuce for maror and horseradish for koirech. It is reported that Rav Soloveitchik would eat horseradish and then lettuce to fulfill the mitzvah of maror. The ultimate legitimization of horseradish use came in 1822 when Reb Moshe Sofer. Who is Reb Moshe Sofer? That's the Chassam Sofer, or is Reb Moshe Sofer his son? Reb Moshe Sofer, 1822. Does that make sense? Reb Moshe Sofer. He wrote, it must be the Chassam Sofer. He wrote that horseradish may indeed be preferable to lettuce, but for an ancillary reason, it is difficult to clean the lettuce for bugs. Chassam Sofer cited in the Mishnah Brewer, he wrote that it would be wrong to violate the biblical prohibition against eating bugs in order to fulfill the rabbinic mitzvah of eating maror. It would be wrong to violate the biblical prohibition against eating bugs. Wow. So he says better to use horseradish because it's preferable to lettuce because of the bugs. Others preferred horseradish over lettuce for another reason. They argued that there are various types of lettuce. We're unsure which one the Mishnah refers to. And so Rav Henkin, who's also a big paisik in America, that we can be confident that horseradish is indeed one of the 5 bitter herbs, but there are doubts about the other types of lettuce. So it seems like these paiskim wanted to say only horseradish. Anyway, bottom line is everyone should follow their minhag or their rav, but there is discussion about it. And obviously, this is more academic.
Hashem is available these days.
Yeah.
Forget that.
Right. Okay, so getting back to our Gemara. So we have these yerakos, these vegetables that a person, we're going to be talking about the laws of Tumah and the laws of Sukkah. And one of the things we have to remember is that the commentaries explain, at least Tosfos explains that there's the way Rashi learns it, even though in Rashi seems to be a mistake over here with that they think because it doesn't fit. There's something that doesn't fit here in Rashi. The issue that the commentaries deal with is when you have a tent that is edible or is susceptible to tumah, then the tent does not block tumah. That's the problem that they're dealing with. In other words, you could block tumah only if you are something that is not as susceptible to tumah. But if you are susceptible to tumah, it doesn't block it. It becomes tameh, and what's above it becomes tameh. And it'll also spread the tumah, the impurity, to anything that's below it. So what exactly are we dealing with over here, where this type of lettuce is going to where this lettuce is going to bring the tumah to anything under it, and it's not going to stop the tumah as a rabbinic decree. This is even a biblical law. So the answer is no, it's not. It's not a biblical law. And the reason is because we're dealing with lettuce that was not washed yet. So in a certain sense, it's not susceptible to tumah yet. And therefore, it will block the tumah and it will not become tameh itself. So the lettuce that's on top of this corpse, it's not going to become tameh. It's a tent above the corpse, but it itself does not become tameh because it was never washed, didn't get wet, and it doesn't block the tumah above it as a rabbinic decree, because lettuce is at some point going to disintegrate, and it's going to be at a stage where it's going to fall, it's going to become so close to disintegrating that it will not block the tumah. So even when it's fresh, it's not going to block the tumah, the impurity, and the impurity will go straight through it and above it, and as a rabbinic decree. And now the Gemara is going to tell us also that it's going to be considered like air when you put it as schach on your sukkah. Air like an air hole, like an empty space on your schach. Why can't it be considered like unkosher schach? Why are we calling it like an air hole? Now, what is the difference in halacha about an air hole in your schach or a unkosher schach? Unkosher schach, if you have something that's not kosher for schach, let's say you put a fry pan as schach on your sukkah. So you got a bunch of you have a whole area of a good kosher mat on your sukkah, and in between your four mats of your sukkah, there's a hole. So you said, you know what? Let me put a frying pan. So you put a frying pan. There's a hole with all you have your mats on your sukkah, but there's one area that you put a frying. So according to halacha, as long as that frying pan is not 4 handbreadths by 4 handbreadths, if it's less than 4 handbreadths, it's kosher. The sukkah is kosher. Sukkah is kosher. Less than 4 handbreadths. What about if you didn't put your frying pan there and you left it empty? So you have an empty space, an air hole in your schach. So there you only get 3 handbreadths. So it's better to have non-kosher schach than to have an air hole. What happens if you have romaine lettuce on top of your sukkah for schach? Now, romaine lettuce, we're dealing with romaine lettuce that was not washed. So it's not susceptible to tumah. But regarding schach, we don't care if it's washed or not. Regarding schach, that doesn't matter. Regarding tumah, impurity, it does make a difference if it's washed or not. Regarding schach, this is an entity that is something that is susceptible to tumah after it'll be washed. It is already invalid for schach. It's invalid for schach. Well, what happens if you put romaine lettuce on top of your sukkah? So according to halacha, it should be like a frying pan. It's not kosher for schach. You should be able to have up to 4 handbreadths of romaine lettuce in the middle of your sukkah, and it'll be a kosher sukkah, as long as it's not 4 handbreadths. A little less than 4 handbreadths, kosher sukkah. However, the rabbis decreed, no, this is not considered non-kosher schach. This is considered disintegrated lettuce, because at some point it's going to reach a stage where it's about to disintegrate. And therefore, we're calling it empty space now. And therefore, you only have 3 handbreadths in order to make your sukkah kosher. Only 3 handbreadths of it would be the maximum. Even a little less than 3 handbreadths would be the maximum to still keep your sukkah kosher. Once it reaches 3 handbreadths, it would be invalid. So let me read it inside. Amr Abba, Amr Shmuel. Reb Abba says the name of Shmuel. The vegetables that the rabbis spoke about regarding maror. A person can fulfill his obligation on Pesach, the Pesach. And those are the 5 items that it mentions, it enumerates in Gemara Psachim in the Mishnah. Now, those items, mevi'in asatuma, they will bring tumah to anything under them. If they are considered a tent, if they are placed above a corpse or an olive size from a corpse, they will cause other things that are under the same tent to be impure, under the same vegetable, under the same lettuce to be impure. And yet, at the same time, even though they're not washed, so they're not susceptible to tumah, nevertheless, they will not block the tumah. And this is a rabbinic decree, because if they're fresh, they should block the tumah because they're not washed yet, so they're not susceptible to tumah, and they should block the tumah. But rabbinically, we say that no, they don't block the tumah, the impurity, because at some point they're going to be very close to disintegrating, and at that point they will not block the tumah, even biblically. And therefore, we say even now that they're fresh, they're not going to block the tumah. And number 3 is upaislan b'sukkah misham avir. We consider them invalidating the sukkah as if they are empty space and not as if they are unkosher schach. So that's the rules about this. And my timer, what's the reason? Because when they dry out, they will become crumbs and fall down, and they will be considered like they're not there. And therefore, even when they are fresh, we do not consider them like they are an entity. Command the less nehudami, they're as if they're not there, and therefore we do not accept them as schach. We do not consider them an oihel to block the tumah, and so on. And there's discussion over here. The simple understanding would be that this is a rabbinic decree, even regarding sukkah as well, that really they should be considered non-kosher schach. However, there is also a way of learning this, that this is biblical, because since it's a sukkah that's not fit for 7 days, because they're going to dry out within 7 days, so it could be that biblically it's not considered schach even now, because your sukkah is not a sukkah that could last for 7 days. Okay, we're going to stop here. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone. Zai Gesund.
Shalom, everyone.
Thank
you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Shalom,
Good
Rabbi.
Shabbos, everybody.